The nightmare of a new order. A Führer, his people, and race. Crimes against humanity. A world of chaos and destruction. This is the story of humanity's darkest hour. The Abyss. Stalingrad, at the end of January 1943, the German Sixth Army is encircled by Soviet forces.
It's terrible weather, snow, freezing, no food. People are eating rats and mice and birds. I mean, just disgusting conditions. Terrible fighting, hand-to-hand fighting at the end.
Hitler has been desperate for the symbolic success of crushing the city that bears Stalin's name.
At least 750,000 German and Allied troops were killed before Stalingrad. It's a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions.
100,000 German soldiers are now taken prisoner, all that remains of the million-strong German army at Stalingrad.
All of a sudden, there was a realization that the Germans, the mighty German Wehrmacht, can lose. And the shock was palpable in Germany. On the home front, it was also palpable amongst the high command as well.
The regime's reaction: there will be no relenting, no negotiations, no peace. For Hitler, surrender is treason.
In the Nazi vision that Hitler has, it is a 1,000-year Reich or it is Armageddon. Either the German people are up for it or they're not. And if they're not, they deserve to be crushed.
Most Germans follow Hitler through 2 more years of death, destruction, and murder. More Germans die in the last 12 months of the war than in the entire First World War. Blind loyalty to the end. Why do so many Germans fight on so stubbornly, though the war is long since lost? Why is there so little resistance? Casablanca, January 1943. President Franklin D. Roosevelt flies to Morocco to a secret summit of the Western Allies to decide future strategy towards Germany. Stalin makes his apologies. He's detained at home by the battle for Stalingrad. Roosevelt and Churchill soon agree on the principal war aim: Germany's unconditional surrender.
Considering what had happened by 1943, that was the only alternative for Germany. Unconditional surrender was absolutely essential. This was a country that could not be trusted to find the strength to rebuild itself on its own, to transform the structure of the state, to purge itself. That was quite clear.
The problem was that the Germans could say, after the equivocal armistice of 1918, we were stabbed in the back. So what Roosevelt wants is none of that the second time. No whinging about the peace, no wimping about it. The Germans are going to have to be shown that they have been defeated totally, unconditionally, without any doubt.
For one German couple, unconditional surrender is a dreadful prospect. Christian Krause is a theologian, Margareta a teacher. Christian is given home leave to get engaged. That saves him from the final battle at Stalingrad. After they're married, their regular letters between Germany and the front express their determination to see it through. But they also reveal Christian's faint doubts. Margareta, on the other hand, is a fervent admirer of Hitler. On January the 22nd, 1943, she writes,
"My dear Christian, you write that, Considering the critical situation we find ourselves in the war today, there's a possibility we may not win. When you say that, I find it somehow painful. One of our leaders once said, "Doubting final victory is treachery." And it is. Because a strong, victorious will, a powerful will to victory, can only grow out of a solid, unerring faith.
The enemy plans to shatter that faith with bombs. 3 days after the Casablanca Conference, American bombers attack Wilhelmshaven. The aim is to destroy the German armaments industry. But the Americans and the British have a second aim, to break German morale with raids on civilians.
The British believe that it must be extremely stressful to live under a dictatorship, and if they have bombs falling on their heads too, then the stress and dissatisfaction will become so great that there'll be a repeat of November 1918. That's what they want to believe. But of course it doesn't happen.
A minimum of 500,000 Germans die in the Allied raids. Big cities like Berlin and Hamburg are the most severely hit. In these two cities alone, 70,000 die. But smaller towns like Düren, Wesel or Paderborn are also devastated. In 1943 and 1944, British and American planes dropped more than 750,000 tons of bombs on Germany. Propaganda Minister Goebbels uses the bombing raids to create the impression that the regime and the people are united in a shared destiny.
In Mannheim, die schwer geprüfte Bevölkerung bekundet in machtvollen Kundgebungen ihren unbeugsamen Willen zum Sieg.
Nazi propaganda stokes the people's anger by talking of terror attacks in order to create a siege mentality. The disaster of Stalingrad serves the same purpose.
The regime's propaganda had to react in some way to this terrible defeat, and Goebbels decided on a kind of diversionary strategy by calling for total war.
Der totale Krieg bedeutet, total war means that everyone is now working, thinking, fighting, and contributing only to this war, at home and on every front. They will be absolutely loyal to the state and trust it blindly. That is the logic of total war. There is now only one goal: victory.
After Goebbels' speech at the Sportpalast, Margareta writes to Christian.
Now the desire to be fully involved in the mission of the war burns great and bright again.
They go along with it, and so enthusiastically that the regime can govern without, or almost without, opposition. You don't have to commit murder yourself. It's enough to collaborate with the regime in apparently harmless ways. By doing that, you're helping the dictatorship achieve its ends.
Total war reaches every part of German society. The Nazis would rather see women stay at home as mothers, but now they have to employ 3 million women, mainly in the armaments industry. Ideological compromises are necessary in the interests of final victory. More and more schoolboys are drafted in to build bunkers or as anti-aircraft auxiliaries.
These resources are tapped to free up soldiers to fight at the front, because by spring 1943, almost 2 million German soldiers have been killed, and they have to be replaced.
Der Ersatz muss irgendwo herkommen.
Hasso Pacina is a flak auxiliary. He and his friends help man anti-aircraft guns to defend Berlin against Allied bombers. The boys only receive a short training. It's deadly work, as the flak emplacements are directly targeted. And yet many of these schoolboys are highly motivated, especially Hasso Pacina. He and his family have been bombed out, their home destroyed. I was furiously angry at the people who were dropping bombs on Berlin, he remembers. The flak auxiliaries have never known any other government than Hitler's dictatorship. They are intensively indoctrinated in Nazi ideology. Hasso was born in 1928. He and his younger brother Heiko have grown up under National Socialism, and they spent years in the Hitler Youth. Their father serves the regime as a departmental head in the Ministry of Food and Agriculture.
If you've got a leader in whom you've put so much faith, and he's constantly saying that somehow he's still going to manage to provide this victory, then there are always going to be people who want to believe it, let themselves believe it.
Hitler's soldiers aren't fighting alone. They're supported by forces from Romania and Hungary in southeastern Europe, and from Finland in the north. Without these allies, the advance towards Stalingrad would hardly have been possible. After Stalingrad, they helped slow the advance of the Red Army. By 1943, every third soldier on the German side is not in fact German. There are 500,000 Romanians in the south and another 500,000 Finns to the north. Romania's dictator Ion Antonescu visits Hitler frequently, competing with his despised Hungarian neighbors for Germany's favor. Hungary and Romania are jockeying for their share of the spoils of final victory. The alliance with Germany is motivated by anti-Semitism and anti-communism, along with the hope of future annexations in the East. But in reality, Hitler sees his allies as no more than cannon fodder.
Well, those Balkan allies bring different things to the party. I mean, first of all, they bring a huge amount of bulk, so they do bring an awful lot of manpower. They're not particularly modernised. Germany makes very little effort to train them up. So it shoots itself in the foot again by having allies of which it is absolutely has nothing but other than military contempt, and making no effort to try and sort of sort them out.
That's not the case with the Finns. They had impressed the Nazis by defeating the mighty Red Army in the Winter War in 1939. And for Finland too, the pact with Germany is more than just a marriage of convenience. The democratically elected government in Helsinki is firmly anti-communist, and thus shares a central element of the Nazi program. But in spite of the military alliance, Finland's Field Marshal Mannerheim maintains a considerable degree of independence from Germany. This experienced general keeps his ally at a distance.
The Finns under Mannerheim have always been skeptical of Hitler and the Germans. And as the war progresses and as the Germans do worse and worse, Mannerheim becomes equivalently skeptical.
In 1942, Hitler travels to Finland for Mannerheim's 75th birthday celebrations. There's a unique secret sound recording of the event.
Im Namen nicht nur meiner selbst, sondern im Namen vor allem aller deutschen Soldaten, die mit einer wirklichen Bewunderung auf ihre finnischen Kameraden blicken. Es ist so leicht für uns, von Freundschaft für die finnische Armee zu sprechen, wenn man so tapfere Bundesgenossen besetzt. Ein so tapferes Volk an seiner Seite weiß.
Benito Mussolini is the ally Hitler values most. Here, the fascist dictator reviews his troops in North Africa. The Italians are fighting beside the Germans, but they stand no chance against the Allies' military superiority. May 1943 brings final defeat in North Africa. German and Italian troops surrender. In July 1943, American and British units land in Sicily. Mussolini is toppled by his own countrymen. Italy signs a ceasefire with the Allies, and German troops occupy the country. The people of Italy now experience Hitler's wrath.
After 1943, Hitler regards all Italians as traitors, not only for betraying their National Socialist partners, but above all for betraying Mussolini, the Duce he so admires.
Longer fronts to defend and fewer allies. Germany's strategic position is looking increasingly desperate. German divisions now fighting in Italy are missing from the Eastern Front. In July 1943, the Germans lose the greatest tank battle in history near Kursk. The Red Army forces Hitler's Wehrmacht into a long and costly retreat.
The Germans have to hold Romania as long as possible because of its oil. Germany's strategy of a mobile war depends on it. Military strategy is primarily influenced by economic factors. And Ploiești in Romania has Europe's second biggest oil reserves.
Deliveries of raw materials from occupied, neutral or allied countries provide essential supplies for Germany's civilian population and for the armaments industry. As well as oil, Romania supplies wheat and components for German factories. These supplies can be transported relatively safely to the Reich on Danube barges. Apart from Allied bombing raids, Germans in the Reich have very little to complain about in their daily lives. There are hardly any shortages. But that's because the occupied regions are being mercilessly plundered.
One of the things that Hitler's very keen on doing is to make sure that the home population on the home front is treated well. In other words, food is taken from Ukraine and Belarus and other places to feed the population. His big obsession is that you keep the German people happy, then you're not going to have some sort of revolution, and that everything will be fine.
Gestapo spies report that support for Hitler drops with every defeat and every bombing raid. And so the fight against internal opponents hots up. The Nazi state relies on terror and surveillance. Anyone who helps Jews or shares doubts about final victory must expect to be sent to a concentration camp. The Gestapo itself may be small in numbers, but it can rely on thousands of informers in the population. Denunciations happen daily in Hitler's Reich.
There were certainly some people who acted out of conviction, who wanted to support the system and denounced dissenters for that reason. There were others who wanted to be obliging, or who expected to gain some personal advantage. And then there were those who thought it would make them more secure in an insecure situation, because they were afraid that if they didn't say anything, they would be accused too.
The resistance group known as the White Rose are some of the best-known victims of denunciation. Hans and Sophie Scholl's group distribute leaflets critical of the regime at Munich University. A caretaker reports them to the Gestapo. 6 brave members of the White Rose are executed. Anything the regime might consider subversive could have consequences if local wardens and informers got wind of it. There's evidence of that in the recently discovered records of the Hanseatic High Court in Hamburg, first published in 2019. They show how the city's highest court passed judgments in the Third Reich. Many of the 460 documented trials were triggered by denunciations. Subversion of the war effort is one of the most frequent charges.
From
1943 onwards, the persecution intensifies. As the military situation worsened, repression within Germany grew. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that if a joke could get you 6 months in prison in 1942, by 1943 that same joke could be considered subversion of the war effort and could get you the death penalty.
That's exactly what happens to singer, dancer and actor Robert Dorsey. In March 1943, a Gestapo informer denounces him when Dorsey tells this joke in a restaurant. Hitler enters a town and a young girl offers him a handful of dust. "What am I supposed to do with this?" asks Hitler. And the girl answers, "Everyone says when the Führer bites the dust, everything will get better." That joke has fatal consequences for Robert Dorsey, a death sentence for undermining the war effort. He's executed at Plötzensee prison near Berlin. His name is removed from all his films. The Gestapo is only one of 7 departments of the Reich Security Main Office of the SS, which in all employs more than 50,000 operatives. One is particularly notorious. Otto Ohlendorf works for the Security Service, or SD. In the war, SD officials like Ohlendorf, a lawyer, command the mobile Einsatzgruppen, the death squads behind the Eastern Front. As head of Einsatzgruppe D, Ohlendorf is responsible for the murder of 90,000 people. He and other SD officials travel back and forth between Berlin and the East, where they mercilessly hunt down humans, especially Jews.
They were given carte blanche to commit murder and crimes of other kinds as well, which were not going to be punished. So by sending the Einsatzgruppen into the Soviet Union with this mindset, it was inevitable that the brutality from the very beginning, from day one, was going to be off the charts. Terror on a scale not yet imagined in Europe.
As the Red Army advances in 1943, the first German atrocities are uncovered. SS Chief Heinrich Himmler sets in motion Operation 1005 to remove every trace of the crimes. Mass graves are exhumed and the corpses burned on funeral pyres. A bone mill is built to destroy the very last remains of the victims.
That is proof that by 1943 they are perfectly well aware that the war can be lost and these crimes will rebound directly on them, in this case on Himmler. They try to remove all traces, and that shows that their belief in victory is shattered.
The war crimes are not just crimes against millions of people. They also serve to bind together a community of crime. A community of crime that no longer offers a way out, and so it holds together to the end.
June the 6th, 1944, the noose tightens around Nazi Germany. D-Day, successful Allied landings on the French Atlantic coast. Nazi propaganda had boasted of the impregnable Atlantic Wall. In fact, these defenses are overwhelmed within hours. German forces fight on fiercely for weeks, to no avail. By July, the 500,000 German soldiers on the Western Front are outnumbered 3-1. At almost the same time, the Eastern Front collapses. The summer offensive of the Soviet Army, Operation Bagration, destroys German Army Group Center. In only 5 weeks, the Red Army advances 700 kilometers westward. In mid-July, Stalin presents the results to the world, parading 55,000 German prisoners through the streets of Moscow, humiliating them in front of the newsreel cameras. While these pictures are being filmed, a group of officers around Klaus von Stauffenberg makes the last preparations for an assassination attempt against Adolf Hitler.
Das Problem des Widerstandes war für diese Leute.
The difficulty the resistance faced was their need to reach beyond the frame of reference of the German military and German society. They had to work against their own system. The idea of diverging from the path they had taken their entire lives was unimaginable. It took an extraordinary amount of courage that very few could find within themselves.
Born into an aristocratic family, Stauffenberg grew up among his siblings in a castle near Stuttgart. He becomes a Wehrmacht officer and is at first well disposed towards the Nazis. But the prospect of defeat and the scale of the war crimes force him and his co-conspirators to act. Few of them are committed Democrats, but they have to stop Hitler by killing him.
We
would all like to have clearly defined heroes who only ever said and did positive things. Stauffenberg started off approving of the National Socialist system and was absolutely in favor of the rearmament of Germany. And he was enthusiastic about developments in Germany until 1939. That's to say, he supported National Socialist rule. And then you see a transformation, as he quite clearly recognizes that what is happening will lead Germany to disaster.
Stauffenberg becomes the linchpin of the military resistance against Hitler. Shortly before they act, he says,
"It is time for something to be done. Anyone who dares to do something must accept that he will probably go down in German history as a traitor. But if he fails to act, he would be a traitor to his own conscience."
Stauffenberg uses his direct access to Hitler to smuggle a time bomb into the Führer's eastern headquarters, the Wolf's Lair. The bomb explodes, killing 4 people, but Hitler is only slightly wounded. Close to midnight that same day, Klaus von Stauffenberg and his closest co-conspirators are shot by firing squad in the courtyard of the Army High Command in Berlin. The Nazi People's Court holds show trials for others involved in the 20th of July plot. The death penalty is a foregone conclusion.
Sie sind ja ein schäbiger Lump! Zerbrechen Sie unter der Gemeinheit! Ja oder nein? Zerbrechen Sie darunter? Herr Präsident. Ja oder nein auf eine klare Antwort? Nein. Nein, Sie können auch nicht mehr zerbrechen. Denn Sie sind ja nur noch ein Häufchen Elend.
Count Schwerin von Schwanenfeld is hanged in Berlin's Plötzensee prison, along with almost 90 other conspirators. The July plot is the last of more than 40 attempts to kill Hitler.
Everyone in the Wehrmacht who was prepared to act against the Nazi state was involved in the 20th of July, and now they were dead or in jail or had gone underground. So there was no one else left who was prepared or willing to do something to end this madness.
Hitler thanks Providence for his survival. His standing amongst the German people is newly enhanced, in spite of the fact that the war has long been lost.
The National Socialists decided to stigmatize the conspirators as traitors, and they succeeded brilliantly. Many Germans were happy. They still believed in the final victory, and they were happy that Hitler hadn't been killed.
The failed assassination attempt binds the Wehrmacht still closer to Hitler. Fanatical officers like Otto Ernst Rehmer are promoted and treated as heroes. Rehmer played a key role in the suppression of the coup.
Wir sind heute Gottlob politische Soldaten. Und wir werden diesen politischen Auftrag unter allen Umständen durchführen bis zu unserem endgültigen Sieg.
German officers are told that they must now be merciless and ready to sacrifice themselves for the cause. General, later Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner is especially notorious. A committed National Socialist and a favourite of the Führer, he has battle-weary soldiers publicly hanged. Many of his troops fear him more than the Red Army.
There is still enthusiasm for Hitler and belief in final victory. On the other hand, brutal repression to keep the troops in line. Faith and terror hand in hand.
Glaube und Terror ergänzten sich. Flying court-martials seek out real and alleged deserters. Altogether, 20,000 German soldiers are executed in the Second World War. In World War I, the total was 48.
That demonstrates very clearly that there's no point in resisting. You're dead. And they also say, if the others win, you're dead too. What else are you going to do but keep shooting?
Also was sollst du machen als weiterschießen?
Summer 1944. On the Eastern Front, the Germans have little left to throw at the advancing Soviets. Between July 1943 and June 1944, the Wehrmacht loses approximately 1,600,000 men in the East. On September the 1st, Goebbels drums up 300,000 more men. In October, Hitler demands another 450,000. But between July and October 1944, the Wehrmacht loses another 1 million men on the Eastern Front.
These are gigantic losses, incomprehensible numbers, and of course the generals know that. But at no point do they say, we've got to stop.
In autumn 1944, Finland and the Soviet Union agree a ceasefire. Following a coup, Romania changes sides and stops delivering oil to Germany. In Hungary, the Germans install a Nazi puppet government. They're known as the Arrow Cross Party. With their cooperation, the SS deports more than 500,000 Jews. Hitler wants to continue the war at any price. Germany's last resources are mobilized, the Volkssturm. It's an act of desperation with no concern for the losses.
Ich schwöre bei Gott diesen heiligen Eid, dass ich dem Führer des Großdeutschen Reiches, Adolf Hitler, bedingungslos treu und gehorsam sein werde.
The Volkssturm mobilizes 60-year-old men and 15-year-old boys, poorly armed and barely trained.
It's interesting that the Volkssturm is under the control not of the Wehrmacht, but of the party. It's another example of the way the party controls society, and the belief that it's better for morale if the party is in charge.
Now it's fear above all that holds Germans together in this futile war. Fear of defeat, fear of Gestapo terror, and fear of the coming punishment for Germany's crimes. The only thing that can save Germany now, many believe, is the much vaunted final victory.
Sie alle sind bereit, den deutschen Schwur zu erfüllen. Sterben kann ich, aber Knecht sein und Deutschland geknechtet sehen, das kann ich nicht.
The people believed what Goebbels told them. That is, there is no way back. They won't forgive us. They'll kill us all. We have to fight on, because we have no choice.
6 million young and old people could theoretically be drafted into the Volkssturm, but then they would be missing from the factories. Armaments Minister Albert Speer is competing for workers too. Allied raids are constantly hitting factories and the railway network. Nevertheless, German war production reaches its peak in 1944.
The Germans solved the problem by using millions of forced labourers. Concentration camp inmates are forced to work in inhuman conditions in the armaments industry.
Between 1939 and 1945, more than 10 million people are forced to work in Germany. In August 1944 alone, there are almost 8 million forced labourers. 5.7 million civilians, 2 million prisoners of war, and 400,000 concentration camp inmates from all over Europe. The slave workers from concentration camps suffer terribly in the final phase of the war.
Many camps, many arms manufacturers certainly couldn't have kept up production in 1944 without these workers.
Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp in the Harz Mountains. It's an extensive system of tunnels excavated by the prisoners themselves under terrible conditions. This is where the V2, Hitler's so-called miracle weapon, is built. More people die in its construction than in its use.
The situation was so terrible that the first prisoners who came to Mittelbau-Dora didn't see daylight for months. They had to sleep in the tunnels too, which was particularly debilitating because of the climatic conditions and the lack of daylight. That, and the inadequate rations, naturally led to epidemics and extremely high death rates among the prisoners.
Later they build barracks above ground. Conditions improve, but the death toll remains high. Léon Delabre, an artist and member of the French resistance, is a prisoner at Mittelbau-Dora. He records the conditions in his drawings. The hard labor underground claims many prisoners' lives.
In Mittelbau-Dora, the prisoners didn't only have to worry about the SS, because there were also civilian workers who would immediately report prisoners who weren't fulfilling their work quotas. And they would report sabotage, which always had dreadful consequences for the prisoners. There was a long list of punishments, from withdrawal of rations to corporal punishment and execution.
Léon Delabre's drawings document executions too, often of prisoners found guilty of sabotaging Hitler's miracle weapons. But survival means continuing to build weapons for the Nazis. It's a terrible moral dilemma.
And of course, the prisoners were always aware of the fact that if they did their work properly, they were supporting the German war effort and perhaps prolonging the war.
V2s are deployed from autumn 1944. It's the start of a new era in warfare, but their effects in the Second World War are limited. In total, V2s claim 8,000 lives, principally in London and Antwerp. More than 20,000 people die building them. Nazi propaganda turns the V2 into the weapon that will change the course of the war, and many Germans still believe it. Christian writes to his wife Margaret from the Western Front.
Since my last letter, the war has reached a decisive turning point, and this new weapon has decisively reinforced our confidence in victory.
New Year's Eve 1944. An SS unit and their friends celebrate as though nothing untoward were happening. On January the 27th, 1945, the Red Army liberates Auschwitz-Birkenau. This is still the symbol of the Holocaust. Knowledge of the genocide is widespread in Germany. Now, as the world sees pictures like these, the lies and suppression of the truth begin.
The Germans are perfectly aware of the crimes they've committed. If you are in the Wehrmacht, certainly if you're in the SS or the Waffen-SS or had been a member of an Einsatzgruppen or you'd worked in any of the camps, so especially the extermination camps, you knew perfectly well a level of bestiality to which the Germans had sunk in Eastern Central Europe. And so you know what you've done. You also know, therefore, that you can expect some sort of retribution for that.
The Western Allies continue their advance. On March the 6th, 1945, they reach Cologne. Large parts of the city centre are in ruins. Christian writes from the Western Front.
Where cities were once in full bloom, the ruins reach up to the sky. This war is our destiny. We must accept it. And it is proof of our unique greatness that we are not prepared to give in to our enemies, death before slavery. We must be mature enough to deserve victory or to accept death.
In the east, the Red Army is nearing the territory of the Reich. Many of its soldiers have lost family members in the German atrocities. They want revenge. Much of Germany's population flees westwards. In mid-March 1945, Hitler orders retreating German troops to destroy bridges, railways, and water mains within the Reich. The rest of Europe is already devastated.
המדיניות של היטלר כמובן מכתיב של מלחמה עד החורבן, עד החיסול,
Hitler's policies inevitably lead to a war of absolute destruction that ends with the events in Germany in May 1945. That is a terrible tragedy for the entire civilian population of Germany, and also a terrible tragedy for the other countries. In Poland, the Wehrmacht leaves behind appalling devastation.
Hitler, at the end, he had absolutely no mercy for the German people and was telling Albert Speer and others to inaugurate the Nero order, where everything was to be destroyed so that the German people themselves would go down in this Götterdämmerung.
On April the 14th, 1945, US troops reached the village of Gardelegen, east of Wolfsburg. Shortly before, SS men had locked more than 1,000 concentration camp inmates in a barn and set fire to the building. Gardelegen is the end point of one of the so-called death marches. Surviving inmates are forced to walk to the west before the Red Army can liberate their camps. They are to serve as a continuing source of labor and as bargaining chips. Many die on the way or are shot by SS guards.
The truth is, we don't have a clear answer about why it happened. The people who finally decide what happens to the prisoners are the guards who collect them from one place and take them to another. From their point of view, the work and Himmler's aims are irrelevant. They want to get rid of the prisoners, go home, and get away from the Red Army and the US Army. And so they murder these people in huge numbers.
Many of the prisoners are exhausted and have no food. The SS guards show them no pity. The last chapter of the Holocaust takes place on German roads and streets, in towns and villages, in front of everyone's eyes. Between the summer of 1944 and May 1945, the SS force more than 700,000 prisoners, at least 250,000 of them Jewish, on 100 death marches to and through Germany. Many routes are from camp to camp. Almost half of the prisoners die. Heinz Galinsky, later the president of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, had been deported to Auschwitz in 1943 with his wife and mother. His family died there. He is forced on a death march. He later writes,
"Many people stood on the bridges, beside the roads. They looked at us. They knew what was happening. There was no reaction, no human emotion."
Knowledge was very, very widespread, and I think this post-war myth, we knew nothing about it, is a self-defensive statement. So it is always something which is truly evil, which is a little bit further away from where you actually were or what you might have known about. And it's turning a blind eye, learning to look away, learning not to register the evidence that is around you.
Heinz Galinsky is herded first to the camp at Dora Mittelbau, and later to Bergen-Belsen, the final destination of several of the death marches. When British troops liberate the camp on April the 15th, 1945, tens of thousands of prisoners are on the verge of death, scarred by hunger, disease, and brutality. More than 13,000 die in the days after the liberation. At the same time, many Germans are still talking in all seriousness about final victory. The top ranks of the military, the party, and the SS agree that there can be no surrender. On April the 21st, 1945, Soviet forces reach Berlin's city boundaries.
Hitler's entire political system was based on that single principle: victory or ruin. And it succeeded in using the crimes to that end, building on the fear in the German population, their awareness that all the bridges had been burned, making all that clear, and so maintaining the inner cohesion of society.
Margareta remains faithful to Hitler to the end.
The Führer is there where the danger is greatest. He is true to himself. Should we not be true to him, unto victory or ruin? We have no choice. We must fulfill the destiny he offers us, with our bravest hearts, with the best that we are. Loyal, upright, neither hesitating nor wavering.
As Berliners prepare for a terrible door-to-door struggle, many are still deceived by the dream of a final victory. Meanwhile, Hitler's henchmen are murdering the last members of the resistance.
It's senseless. They can hear the thunder of Soviet guns as the last prisoners are shot on April 30th, 1945, immediately before the liberation of Berlin.
This is probably the last photograph of Hitler, taken in the inner courtyard of the ruined Reich Chancellery. In the night of April the 29th, 1945, he marries his longtime companion Eva Braun in the Führerbunker. The next day, he shoots himself. Eva Braun swallows cyanide. The last letters between Margareta and Christian are lost. Christian is captured by the Americans. After Hitler's suicide, Margaret writes in her diary,
I sit very quietly beside the radio. My hands fall into my lap. Oh Lord. And then we know. That is, our ears hear the news. Our mind absorbs it, but the heart refuses to understand. A great, infinite emptiness gapes before us. The German people without the Führer. Is this the end? Is there any way out of this desperate situation?
For Margareta and Christian, there is a future. He returns to Saxony on his release from the prisoner of war camp. They start a family and become citizens of the German Democratic Republic. Goebbels and his wife kill their 6 children and then themselves.
Hitler and Goebbels were the central clique. For them, nothing remained but life or death, and they chose the conclusion that their ideology had in reality dictated from the start.
Many followed them. Suicide seems the only way out in the face of the anticipated vengeance of the victors and the likely destruction of Germany. Panic and fear stoked by years of propaganda. In Berlin alone, more than 7,000 people take their own lives.
Das ist auch ein Phänomen, das es in dieser Form
That was a phenomenon that has simply not been seen in other wars.
überhaupt nicht gegeben hat. Es zeigt
It shows how widespread the realization was that this really had been an utterly criminal war of plunder and annihilation, initiated and waged by Germany.
Raub- und Vernichtungskrieg gehandelt hatte.
And many Germans fight on after Hitler's death, either out of obedience to mindless superiors or from a fanatical conviction that a hero's death is better than surrender. Not only in Berlin, but in Breslau, Prague, and in other places, the SS do not lay down their arms. The insane delusion lives on, even after the Führer is gone.
The people supported the dictatorship. At no point did a majority of Germans ever turn against Hitler. It was always a very, very small minority of the German people who turned against him and who understood what the dictatorship had turned Germany into.
The Nazis' projected 1,000-year Reich has lasted just 12 years. It leaves behind a world in ruins and a Germany stigmatized as the land of the guilty. Death, Holocaust survivor Paul Celan wrote, is a master craftsman from Germany.